I became CEO in 95. The whole system hit 1 billion in sales, 44 years old. It took 4 years to double. 97 to '01, it doubled from 1 billion to 2 billion. So it just absolutely exploded. Before I became CEO, the stock really had kind of wallowed for 4 years. But then in 96, 98, 2000, '02, and '04, we split the stock every other year for 8 years. It really was a process of learning the business, but also building lots of trust with franchisees who historically had not trusted the franchisor, and convincing them that what we were out to do was build a brand in such a way that they would become more wealthy and want to grow with the brand. And they did. It was a continuing win-win approach, and it was a continuing win-win outcome.
So today we have a man that was the general counsel. So he was the big attorney in the crowd, the CEO and chairman of Sonic Corporation. But what I absolutely love about today's guest is that he talks about himself being a jack of all trades. And in a lot of ways, that's a contrarian approach to what we've been told lately, where you have to focus and you have to become an expert and you have to do it now and do it forever. Well, today, our guest is going to show us a different and, dare I say, better way. So welcome, Cliff Hudson. So nice to have you here.
Thank you, Patty, and I appreciate the opportunity, and it's great to be with you as well. And thank you for the kind introduction.
All right. And do you go by Cliff or Clifford? I didn't even ask you.
Either is fine, but Cliff, probably if I'm in the household, my wife will call me Cliff and other people will call me Cliff. So that's fine.
Okay. So I don't want to drive off a cliff here. So I want to make sure I call you the right name. All right. Okay. So you have done so many amazing things and you've written a couple of books, but I like, as my listeners know, I really want to know the man, Cliff Hudson, before I know about the professional. So tell me what I need to know about Cliff that I can't Google and find out.
Well, I think if you do start as you did with my book, and the subtitle referring to myself as Jack of all trades. I, in terms of preparation in my life and a path in my life, I had a number of things that I enjoyed. And when I thought about what do I want to do in my life, I think it was a moderately wide array of options that I could consider. I grew up very.
Okay, so Cliff, hang on a second. I'm gonna interrupt you. So where did this life start? Okay. Where were you born?
Okay, very good. So I was born in Dallas, Texas.
Go Cowboys!
Though I am a twin, I was my twin sister was born before me, and until I was about 10 years old, 12 years old, she was quite a bit bigger than me. So I had the sense of kind of being the youngest kid in the family, and technically I was even with a twin sister.
What was the age difference? Because my twins were 2 minutes apart.
We were 3 minutes apart.
Okay,
my sister and I, and then. A brother 2 years ahead and a sister 4 years ahead, more or less. So all four of us in really less than 4 years. So our parents at 20 had no kids and at 25 had 4 kids. So quite.
And what were they thinking? But we don't really want to have the answer to that question.
Yeah. So my family moved before I was 2 years old to Wichita Falls, Texas, where we lived for the next 10 years. That's a fairly formative thing in my life, and I make reference to it in my book in terms of who am I and what makes up my values and my outlook, et cetera. Because when I was 11, just before turning 12, my dad, who had a small business, it was a truss manufacturing, so he made trusses for roofs on homes, on houses, and he and a single partner.
So excuse me, for the people that don't know, describe what a truss for a roof is.
So a triangular shaped wood structure that supports a roof and not visible, from a finished home, But between the regular residential living area and the roof, you've got a truss structure that's generally going to be triangular shaped. Because
so in other words, it's the support. Is it the support for the roof? Is that fair to say?
Internal support for the roof. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
And the story, as I was told, and I guess with some evidence of it, his partner was having an affair with another woman and embezzling money out of the business to support her. And so when there was a downturn in the economy, that shortage of capital became clear, and the business failed just completely because of the inadequate capital. And so this was, to say the least, a significant disruption in my parents' life and our family life, because he lost everything. My parents lost everything. We moved out of our home and ultimately moved in order for him to take a job, as opposed to the entrepreneurial things he'd done for all his life. We moved from Wichita Falls to Oklahoma City, which is what...
That must have been devastating for him because, I always joke and say, I'm unemployable. I have to be an entrepreneur. And interestingly enough, so much of my work deals with co-founders or partners in an entrepreneurial business. Yeah. And what I talk about all the time is a person that's starting a company looking for a partner, he will often vet another potential partner for skills, but you really need to vet them for character, and they often don't do that. And that's where the trouble usually comes in. So my heart is breaking for your dad. Can you imagine the poor man?
Well, years later, as I look back, I just can't imagine the strain and stress and so on him and on my parents' relationship and so on. It had to be, in a way, you could say devastating, but he was quite an entrepreneur and he recovered fairly quickly. He did take a sales position that was helped by being in Oklahoma City. But I would say, so this occurred when I was in fifth grade. I would say
you remember it. You would clearly remember at 10-ish.
Well, absolutely, because we lived in a house that was kind of their dream house, and we just had to walk away from it, And the house we moved to, not only did we not own, believe me, it was not a dream house. So it was several years before they owned a home again, and frankly, when they did, it was seller financing. I'm relatively confident he could not get a bank loan. That aside, I would say within 2, maximum 3 years, he had new capital partners and had a business running again. And it was, in retrospect, just looking at a guy going bankrupt at 36 and by 40 being back in business, but it was quite a bit of stamina. And
did he go back into construction of some kind?
He did. At that point, he went into literally just general contracting. Eventually, he did real estate development and construction and so on and so forth. So a little broader and deeper. But initially, it was just strictly a construction activity. But the odd thing, the best economic thing that came to him over the next few years was that his embezzling partner came back to him with a new deal. And in fact, they went back into business together.
Wait, he said yes? He took him back in?
He took him back in. And
what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I would have a hard time with it. At the time, it must have just been a question of, one, how good was the other deal? And two, how good was the deal he had, currently? And I think his current capital partners were perhaps weak. And the new deal.
What do you mean by weak? What do you mean by define weak?
Well, their source of capital wasn't that deep and it wasn't that strong. And I think he was probably a little insecure about the sustainability of that. Meaning my dad was probably insecure about the sustainability.
I would love to know what your mother thought about him going back into business with this scandals.
Well, neither of my parents are living any longer. I can't help but think my mother was appalled.
Yeah.
But that was not Yeah,
I think I would be as a wife. I'd be like, what's that expression? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
yeah, right. The fact is that that second effort turned out to be extremely lucrative and probably lasted for, let's just say 8 or 10 years. And as I said, was really almost, you could say, exceptionally lucrative. It played out quite well. I think fair to say the best business deal he ever had in his career. So,
Defined by profit.
yeah, defined simply by profitability.
Do you know, I have to ask this, do you know if there were any parameters put into the relationship and the contract and the agreement so your dad would know where every dime is going? There had to have been. Your dad was clearly a smart man.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. You would have to think that the answer is yes, but I don't know the answer to that. So
okay, so all right, that's just something that I always wonder. That's amazing to me. Okay,
right, yeah, well, amazing to me too. I think if I were in that circumstance, life is always a question of what options you have, and it must have been at that moment in time, those years later, that the options that his former partner presented outweighed the risks.
Sure.
So whether he consciously went through that thought process or not, I don't know, but he did intuitively if he didn't consciously.
Right, and also the partner, I'm sure, did an Academy Award-winning mea culpa speech to your dad. That would be my hunch.
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
He was then no longer married to his first wife, but instead had taken up with the woman with whom he had been having the affair and was married to her. So I don't know if my dad figured the embezzlement would be over or what he assumed, but perhaps that, I don't know if that helped or not, but whatever. So the path, that was, I think, quite formative for me to watch the level of risk my dad took and the impact on the family. That did affect me years later in terms of either how I would isolate my risk away from my family or also just reduce my family's risk altogether. In other words, when years later, many years later, when our company went public, one of the first things I did with my share of the proceeds was to pay off my home mortgage, so that we had the house free and clear and so on. So
and you felt that, and that was a conscious effort, remembering the trauma of losing your childhood home.
Absolutely. The comfort of having title to our home, free of any liens, etc., was just of enormous comfort. So. And
how else did that play out, Cliff? Like when you would make that, like that's a pretty black and white, but there must have been countless decisions with countless nuances involved where you made a decision and you were weighing it perhaps to nobody else's knowledge, including your board, as it impacts your family. I would love to hear one of the two of those stories.
Well, probably at the other, in the business setting, the other end of the extreme, you might say, was when I was a young general counsel and we had the opportunity to buy the company. The company had gone through a lot of damage in the early 80s. The then owners had taken it to a very rapid expansion period of time. And I would say probably with poor site selection in the restaurant building sites and poor support over time. And the consequence of this was, while they opened 1,000 stores in a 5-year period, they ended up closing 300 of those. And this is part of what created the opportunity for us to buy it, was the damage that they created. So when that opportunity came up, so you would say, how did that affect my outlook? There was still considerable risk. The company had not been turned around. As it turned out, it was probably at its low point and ready to turn back up. But that was not clear. And that, of course, enabled us to buy the company more cheaply than we would have been able to otherwise. But it meant that I wasn't that interested in taking a huge amount of risk personally. And I was expected to make some capital contribution. And so I made the absolute minimum contribution I could and keep my job. Mm-hmm. And so I have no doubt that that risk I had seen elsewhere. And by the way, I mean, at the point in time this occurred, 1985, 1986, we were in this region of the country in the middle of an oil bust.
Correct.
That just had enormous, widespread, horrendous impact. The bankruptcies, the companies that went bankrupt, the individuals that went bankrupt, the housing that was foreclosed on, housing that had been homes for any number of people standing empty, literally for a number of years in many cases. So I was
right, because back then Oklahoma was very much oil based, right? Phillips 66. Just like my husband was in oil for years. So I'm familiar.
And frankly, there still is too great of a reliance on it, but it's a little bit, we're a little bit different world, and we're seeing a little bit less of a boom and bust cycle. But and Oklahoma City's economy is more well diversified than it was 30 and 40 years ago. So, so this was a setting that affected me. And did make me much more conservative than I would have been otherwise, both because of my own upbringing and because of just the horizon, looking around and seeing. The dysfunction that can occur in these kind of widespread settings, including not just divorce but suicides. It was just a sad setting, a sad time. So that I would say in my business career, that experience I'd had versus and along with what I was watching around me caused me to be very, very conservative in going in. There really was nobody in the company that continued as an owner, I don't believe. There certainly was no one who made any smaller investment than I did. And there was, I don't know if there was anyone who made it as small. Most of the people kind of really gambled quite a bit, including, home mortgages and so on. So they're really kind of putting it all in, So that was one circumstance that may be much more.
What was your wife's take? What did she have a thought, or was she not really involved, just doing her thing?
Well, I think her view was that I probably should invest to a degree necessary just to steady the job, and that was the explicit discussion we had at the time. So that was. Frankly, we had some discussion because of how rough the economy was. We had some discussion about leaving the region and looking somewhere where the economy was more diversified and opportunity was greater. We ended up not doing that for a whole variety of reasons, not the least of which around that same time, 1985, we had our first son. We had support nearby with in-laws and parents and so on. And so that was one motivation for staying. And in addition to that, then the company started working. The turnaround started taking place, and things looked pretty good. We bought the company in 86, and 87, 88, 89, 90, just an amazing turn to the positive. So it wasn't as though I had to wait a long time to see whether it was the right decision. That was so my path. I kind of jumped ahead quite a bit my background pitch in the book of the Jack of all trades. I went to public schools in Oklahoma City. I really developed some, self-concept of, but some, I think, actual skills related to student leadership in 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Finished high school, I think, with a view of myself as having leadership potential.
Why, Cliff, how did you learn leadership skills? Were you in student government? Were you in sports?
I was in student government throughout high school. I was a class officer as a sophomore. I was president of the student body as a senior.
There you go.
But also in those 4 years, it was the first, when I started high school, it was the first year of court-ordered desegregation in our school district. And this really, I mean, that was an enormous growing opportunity, I mean, just in all ways. And so my worldview kind of expanded quite a bit, but it was also quite educational to watch how many parents behave badly through that period of time. So I really made an effort.
How did your parents react to this?
So my mother was a school teacher, and the readers the listeners listening can probably tell by accent, but my entire family is Caucasian. But my mother taught at an elementary school that was completely African American, and my father, though still once again a small business operator, when the federal courts asked for volunteers to serve in the capacity to advise the judge who had ordered the desegregation, my father was probably one of the few business people that stepped forward to serve on a volunteer board. It sounds kind of funny, but back in the 70s, the judge referred to it as a biracial committee. So
wow.
My father was appointed that. There were probably 10 or 12 community members on it, and he was appointed chair of it, as a matter of fact. So this brought a fair amount of attention to him and to the family. But point being, my parents wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that was their message to us as well. And so my role at school was, how could I help people get along? I became president of the Human Relations Club my junior year, but all in an effort to reduce, conflict, reduce misunderstanding. And some of the relationships I made at that time with kids of different backgrounds, color, et cetera, are relationships that I've maintained over the decades. So wow. It was a life-changing experience, but one that also was a real introduction to leadership and, getting people to move along a path, one sort or another, that might not be their primary instinct. And once I got into the franchising business decades later, there were times where I felt like I was running a student council meeting, So
in what way?
Well, because you had to, oftentimes literally stand before a group of people with moderately diverse needs and backgrounds and circumstances, but get them to come together and convince them it was in their interest to go the direction you felt like was best, and sell them on it. I had to say, my former boss used to use the phrase "sell, don't tell." But as a franchisor, I think what you like is you like to have a big stick, but you don't show the big stick. You sell, you sell, you sell. Mm-hmm. And so those processes of including people, showing them how it was in their best interest, showing them how we would be able to achieve more if we worked together. I think those were skills that I started learning as a teenager, and but then applied them, in a very serious way through my business career. I didn't immediately go into business. Never thought that I would. When I left high school, my subject matter that I enjoyed the most was history, and that's really still quite true. I read history regularly and primarily. After having taken a degree in history, part of the question is, what do you do with a history degree? Well, you either teach
law school,
or you go on to graduate school, or you go to law school. And so that's what I did. I went to law school. Yeah. And
how did you go to law school in Oklahoma?
No, I went to Georgetown. And so my wife and I were in the Baltimore, Washington area for 5 years, mm-hmm. in our 20s. So very, very formative time. And really great growing up years. I think we were in the area from ages 22 to 27.
Perfect.
It was my big idea to return to this area of the country, perhaps intriguing to you, because I found things so much more entrepreneurial. We were living in Baltimore at the time. She was in graduate school and I was working. We kind of reversed roles. And what I found was, a large old law firm with big clients, et cetera, and a town with interesting history. But I found that, the likelihood of my being able to pull the levers, with any significance within a few years was not great, because the scale of things were such that my fear was you were, a cog in the machinery,
Yeah.
So she agreed. We moved back to this area of the country, and the timing really could not have been worse, because we were back a few months before they started closing banks and foreclosing homes, and it was pretty horrendous. I was in a small law practice because it looked like a real ground floor opportunity. But everything changed once the bust hit, changed almost overnight. I did that for 2 years, was pursuing Sonic as a client, hoping to bring it into the firm I was with. And they kind of turned the tables on me, in a way that turned out being good. But I was pursuing the company as a client, and instead they convinced me to come inside as legal counsel. So I was 29 years old, and suddenly general counsel of a company with some 25 years of history, but at a challenging point in time.
Cliff, I have to ask you, what seduced you to jump ship?
One, the firm I'd been with, when I joined it 2 years earlier, just before the economy started unwinding, it really had a strong business practice. And 2 years later, that had changed fundamentally. It was quite extraordinary. You had to go in that circumstance from helping build companies, transactions, capital raising, whatever, to helping undo things, primarily, frankly, through bankruptcy or creditors' rights. And I think
so. Companies were in distress.
Well, significant distress and few resources to go around. So I think.
Do you find that depressing?
Well, it can be depressing. The fact is, I think had I stayed in it, I might have found it more interesting than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
But
how so?
Oh, because I think in some ways undoing deals can be it can be even more complex than putting them together in the first place.
Yeah, reverse engineering.
Yeah, and when there are fewer resources, you got to be pretty clever about how you structure it so that somebody feels like they're not just getting a raw deal. So I think it's a tricky environment. I didn't give it a chance. So one, I saw the world changing with the firm I was with in a way that was not good. Two, the Sonic opportunity, they had a new CEO, and I kind of sensed that he would be doing something different. It was a real change for the company to have this newer, younger CEO. He was 36, and all the fellows who had built the thing were in their 50s. So I thought, well, okay, let's go give this a shot. And
time really, for the new regime.
Yes. But my other thought was, if this doesn't work, I'm probably going to leave this region of the country anyway because of the economic challenges.
Yeah, so what do you have to lose, almost?
And my wife was in graduate school, and so it enabled her to continue with her graduate school and not have that disruption. So I did that in '84, and it culturally it was a big change. From a lifestyle standpoint, it was actually a little nicer because the workload was not as heavy as the private law practice.
And you're the GC, so I would imagine it's more salary, yes?
It was an increase in pay, that is correct, and an increase in benefits. As a matter of fact, it was. You are correct, and that grew not radically, but it continued to grow over time, and until we became a public company a number of years later, and then it grew even more so.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say this concept of jack of all trades, by this time I was turning 30. And
oh my gosh, ancient, right?
yeah. So I thought, but I still enjoyed music quite a bit and found ways to
Oh,
participate.
are you a musician?
I play the guitar, self-taught guitar and piano.
Oh, no. I
And
was told that if you play the piano, you can pretty much play any other instrument. I coach a musician, but a fabulous guy. That's what he told me.
Well, it does. One does translate to the other nicely, and it can knowing, if you're going to play a stringed instrument, guitar, banjo, mandolin, etc., having the chord structure and so on, and the piano to help, it really can help you go on both ways. It's kind of an interesting. It's helped me always. So I didn't view myself. This was my first foray into business from a full-time standpoint, and I didn't consider myself a business person. I hardly consider myself a lawyer. I was 5 years out of law school, kind of getting that self-concept a little more, but still kind of early on from a career standpoint. So I would say, with the music and the local, the neighborhood leadership activities, the business, the law, I saw myself in a number of fields. What I didn't realize, that I can now look back and see, is that really did begin almost a 10-year process of just say on-the-job training that really gave me an education in business generally, but specifically in our business, the sonic business. So that 10 years later, 84 to, let's say 92, 93, when I did transition out of law, first into CFO and then COO before becoming Chief Executive Officer, I had an enormous training period, I think you can say, that allowed me to successfully move into the business side. And I didn't see it at the time, but there was no way I could have jumped into the business side, at age 30. And yet the preparation in that decade of my 30s was relatively complete, So by the time I jumped over, I still had a wide array of things I enjoyed, and yet my skill development had become much more narrowed, and you can use the term specialized. In spite of that, I still, what I am concerned about in terms of people fearful of being a jack of all trades is particularly meeting a younger person, and meeting a person that's 20, 25 years old who has concern that they don't have the journey figured out. And they're concerned that they don't have their specialty yet. And my reaction is, stop worrying about it. It'll unfold itself over time if you're open to it. But
the media and the education is so specialized focused. So there's a book out called Range by David Epstein. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
And he talks about, why generalists triumph in a specialized world. And as I was reading it, I thought, and he gives the example, I think it might be somewhere else where they give the example of Tiger Woods versus Roger Federer.
Yeah.
Right. And it tells you everything that you need to know. Tiger Woods was raised to be a golfer. Roger Federer was raised to be a man, and the rest is history. Right.
Yeah. Right.
But for some reason, that message has very much been lost. Like when you were going through your process, I don't even know if we knew that you were a generalist or a specialist. You were just learning and growing and evolving, right? And then now it's like the first job you take out of school, you get slotted, and the consultants come in and tell you really what they don't know. I think they're making it up half the time. Now I'm going to get myself into trouble. But, I get those phone calls. I'm at this job. What do I tell them? And I tell them, and they're 25 years old. How could they possibly know?
Right.
So I really want you to beat the drum on the value of being a generalist and how that has catapulted your career to really, you're such a humble guy, but incredible success, Cliff.
Well, I have received feedback from a number of young people And it would appear as though college age people who read the book and they're quite relieved to see that the fact that they haven't figured it all out yet is
I
not.
don't think we have figured it out and yet.
Right. Yeah, you may need to tell them it's a lifelong pursuit. But the fact is, many I do get that feedback and the affirmation that they feel pressure to specialize and have it figured out, at 20 and 25 years old. And I think to a considerable degree, this arises when in academic programs, I hear, because of my engagement with the university nearby, that as an example, in the history department, the parents will approach the school and say, I don't want my son to study history because I don't know what he's going to do with it. And of course, the answer is, well, you don't know what he's going to do with anything. I mean, he's 18 years old,
How many kids know what they want to do at 18? How many people really know?
Right. Well, and if they think they do, then it's at best a hunch, So at any rate, this is from my standpoint,
By the way, Cliff, excuse me, I have to say this. By the way, what you just said, I was going to let it go, but I can't. It blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind that an 18-year-old's parents talk like, why is the university even having these conversations with these parents?
You know why I think that is? I think because our society has shoved so much cost of higher education onto the family and the student.
Which is ridiculous. It's so expensive, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yes, it is ridiculous how expensive it has become. And as a result, parents start looking immediately for some
justification
method of payback, from the education. And when they see when I finished my history degree, had I not gone on to law school, one thing I was considering was a master's degree in education. Well, where would that lead me? Well, it would lead me into teaching school. I didn't have a lot of student debt, but it would have been a, very moderate income and probably an interim, point of my, professional career, or meaning a way stop more than a career. But nonetheless, I think this is one of the reasons is the cost has gotten so high that families are pressuring their kids and pressuring themselves because the family may be helping underwrite it to see a method of payback immediately, not over a 10 or 20 year period.
I mean, I think that's a piece of it. I also think there's a piece of the, they used to have the helicopter parents. Now they have the snowplow parents, and they're so much more involved. But I want you sharing your wisdom.
Well, I think the thing that that I enjoyed about my history studies and even the law studies were the development of analytical skills,
critical thinking.
In the history setting, you look at disparate events. Things that may seem unrelated, things that may seem to have significant impact or not on an outcome, to be able to analyze how things might have gone differently. It is looking at the various causes that come together to an outcome. In law, in some ways, you do the same thing, and sometimes in law you do the reverse. Particularly if it's about case law, and that is you look at the finished point and you work back, and then the critique of the parties, how it might have come out differently, and so on. But in a lot of ways, I view the process of history studies having a lot of similarity to the study of common law, the civil code and Napoleonic law. I don't know. But the common law, developing, of course, from the UK. My history studies were largely English history studies, so even from a fact standpoint, there was a lot of overlap between the two for me. So this was all about critical thinking. This is all about having a significant degree of curiosity about the world and how the world works. and being open to learning about it and learning people's path, et cetera, et cetera. And usually when I meet people, the first thing I want to know is I want to know their history. There are other things. It's not uncommon to meet someone and they say, "What kind of book you reading these days?" Well, okay, that can be a little insightful. But what I'd like to know is, where they grew up. Did they have any siblings? What was?
But I asked you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. So anyway, I think this gives you a different perspective about a person, but it gives you a different perspective about a setting in which there are several people coming together. So all of that coming together, joining Sonic in '84, just turning 30 years old. We bought the company in '86. That was highly risky. We recapitalized the company in '88. It was no longer risky. '87 and '88, the company was doing very well. We restructured the ownership in '88 because our 50% owner wanted out, and brought in a new 50% owner, and then amongst the management team consolidated ownership. So now, without putting any money in, I increased my ownership quite a bit, 32 years old. And we go 2 years down the road, and because of some changes inside, the outside 50% partner, once again, different partner, wanted out. And the solution then was for the company to go public. So I oversaw that process. Now I'm
That was payday, right?
That was a payday. It was a huge payday, because suddenly all this talk about value now had a price on it every day. And it can be, and it was the stock market. You can look at the stock every day and you can see what your net worth was. And before that, it had been talk and hope and aspiration and so on. So this was, I'd now gone through 7, 8 years of much more intensive education on how the company made money, how it didn't make money, on selling what we were doing, selling it to capital partners, the marketplace, so on and so forth. And after we went public, really to my utter surprise, my boss asked me to become chief financial officer. So here I am with a law degree, a history degree. All my financial education is on the job training. So it surprised me, but I also thought, well, what the heck? I seem to know more about anybody else on board. So I became CFO for 1 year. And then my curiosity was the stock performance and so on. I went to my boss and I said, I'm about to turn 40 and, I want to see what else there is in the world. So I'm giving you a few months notice, but I'm going to leave and don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll explore and I'm okay with that. So about 60 days later, he came back to me and said, well, instead of leaving, you want to do something different? Why don't you run the company? And he moved me in the position of COO.
What happened to the COO?
Well, there was a guy before we went public who really was chief operating officer and really running the company, and this is why then the half partner, the 51% partner, wanted out. He was fired, and since I was legal counsel, that's something I really shouldn't talk about.
Right, you were involved with, right. But you were involved.
Well, I had intimate knowledge of what occurred and what caused the firing, but it was a summary dismissal on a Monday morning.
Sounds to me like it might be the corporate version, in some way, shape, or form, from your dad's first partner, which I know you can't talk about.
I can't talk about it. So
right, I already told you too much. Okay,
but
the spot was open. Like I thought maybe they pushed somebody, made somebody step aside so you could take their shoes.
Well, just left a void in the company. Now, I will say, about a year later, an internal guy took the title of COO, but I will just say he never functioned as that. He weaseled his way into it, but he did not function as that. He had limited responsibilities, and particularly, he had limited leadership and limited intellectual capacity. So he really never played that role.
So the real question is, how the heck did he ever get there to begin with?
Well, yeah. Well, that's a different story.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yes. So I think more and more in terms of strategy, I started filling the role, and without title, without pay, without formal whatever, I started filling the role. And so when I told my boss I was leaving, I think his own assessment must have been, I could do without this guy, Hudson, a lot. That's going to be a lot more problem than dealing without the fellow who actually had the COO title. So in essence, he gave up the title and I took it, And in fact, I was also given full reins. I was the only person that reported to the CEO, and everybody else reported to me. And within about 6 months, the fellow who had the title of COO left the company anyway. So now I really was in a full business position. I did report to the CEO, and a year and a half, he left rather abruptly. I think he had come to the view that his opportunity for impact was more limited. I wouldn't agree with that, but he did. He came to that conclusion, and he left. And without doing a search and without going through any other process, the day he left, the board appointed me as his successor CEO. And so
I tell you, Cliff, if I was working with you and I saw you walk in the room, I would be looking at my watch saying, "How much more time do I have left here?"
Well, okay, but he surprised everyone by leaving. But then, like I said, the board turned to me same day and said, "You want to be CEO?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm already kind of doing the job. Why not?" And so that started a 23-year run as CEO. And
you got into your groove. I
got into a groove, a method of thinking about the business. To the point of the young person saying, how do you know what you're going to be doing? I didn't know what we'd be doing. And it really was getting to first base. And when you're first, you can see the light towards second base and working towards second base. And when you see the light, it really is just a progressive process. And we built in the late 90s, we dramatically built the average store profitability of the system. And the consequence of this was just explosion in all kinds of ways. Explosion of new stores, meaning growth, explosion of a marketing program, explosion of capital investment in the existing system. And I became CEO in 95. The whole system hit 1 billion in sales, 44 years old. The system was in 97. It started in 53. It took 44 years to hit 1 billion in sales. It took 4 years to double. In 97 to 01, it doubled from 1 billion to 2 billion. So it just absolutely exploded. And as a franchise company, it meant that our royalty stream also exploded.
Sure.
The company, before I became CEO, the stock really had kind of wallowed for 4 years. But then I became CEO in 95. In 96, 98, 2000, 02, and 04, we split the stock every other year for 8 years.
Gosh, I wonder if I bought it.
No. Well,
I don't do that stuff. My husband does it. So
yeah. Well, you would have come out.
I did either way.
Yeah. So it was really on a great run, and so there are other stories from there. But it really was a process of learning the business, but also building lots of trust with franchisees who historically had not trusted the franchisor, and convincing them that what we were out to do was build a brand in such a way that they would become more wealthy and want to grow with the brand. And they did.
So a win-win.
It was a continuing win-win approach, and it was a continuing win-win outcome. And
so Cliff, I want to respect your time. I know we're running a little over, but I would love to have you back because, first of all, for so many reasons, for all your wisdom, but I would love to hear how you did create the win-win compared to your competitors. And I already know you are not sitting back, just, whittling the days going by. So I'd love to know what you're up to now. And to that point, I do have to ask you one more question.
Yes.
May I? Okay. What's the last book you reread and why?
Oh, you use the term reread.
I gotta keep you on your toes, Cliff.
Well, that's interesting because I haven't done that much of that over the years. I read regularly.
I know you told me that. That's why I had to put a little twist in it.
Well, so I did. Boy, I got to. I don't. I have to say, I don't know if I have ever gone back to reread a book other than. Look, this is going to be bad when I say this. Other than my own.
No. Go ahead, please, because I'm going to give you the opportunity to pitch your book. Of course, I am.
Well, writing it, but then also going back and reading for any number of reasons. My little book, Master of None: How a Jack of All Trades Can Still Read the Top. But I have gone back through that many times. Other books, boy, I'd had to work on that. Not long ago, I finished David McCullough's book, Brave Companions. And I'm now started, it's kind of a history and music book about why 1971 was the greatest year for pop music ever. And the name of it, skipping my recollection here. But I can't say that I have ever gone back to reread the book I'm reading now, Never a Dull Moment, 1971.
Well, I would probably venture to say, because as a generalist, you're always learning, and the information never stops. Yeah. So, Cliff, tell people where they can and where you would like them to get your book, Master of None, Jack of All Trades, which I absolutely love. I want all you listeners out there to please get this book. Please give it to your college age children, give it to friends, children. I think they will breathe a sigh of relief, because you cannot argue with the success and the integrity of Cliff. So, don't reinvent the wheel. So tell people where they can learn more about your book and about you.
Of course, you can get it on Amazon. The book is published by HarperCollins. You can find it on their site as well. You can also go to my site, which is just cliffordhudson.com, and you'll find the availability there as well, and related information. So I think it's pretty readily available. Just Google it and you'll get there. So,
do you have it in audio?
It is in audio as well, and I did record it for audio, which was an interesting process. I enjoyed that more than I thought I would.
Okay, well, Cliff, thank you so much. This was a delight. I just feel like I'm sitting here with wisdom, like kind wisdom, which I think we can all agree that the world needs a lot more of. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that perspective, and I'll look forward to visiting further as the opportunity arises.